Good evening, Upper Darby community. Welcome to the January 24th Education and Pupil Services Committee in-person and virtual meeting. Before we call tonight's meeting to order, Dr. McGarry, will you please outline the public participation procedures, please, sir?
Good evening, everybody. Board President Brown. Tonight, we have two different set of meetings. They are committee meetings. Typically, during committee meetings, it is question and comment, as opposed to the legislative meetings that take place once a month. In order to participate and ask questions of the board, and the board could either answer them themselves or direct them to the appropriate administrator, you could do that several ways. If you're in person this evening, after each agenda item, the board will review the items, have conversations, and at the end of the agenda itself, it will be open to public comment or questions. If you're in person, please come to the microphone, provide your name, address, and the specific agenda item you'd like to comment on or provide a question. And again, the board will do their best to answer those questions or direct them to the administration to answer questions that they would like us to follow up on. If you want to participate virtually, you can do so by phoning in to 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Again, provide your name, address, and the specific agenda item from the report that you'd like to comment on and question. The board will take that into consideration before moving forward. You could also email to committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org. Again, provide your name, address. It's very important that you also add the specific agenda item you'd like us to take into consideration or provide answers to this evening. Happy to go over this again when we move from the Education and Pupil Services Committee to the Finance and Operations. Again, there are two separate meetings this evening.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. The meeting of the Education and Pupil Services Committee will please come to order. Roll call, Board Secretary Mr. Rogers, please.
Dr. Haig,
Present.
Mr. Desnoyers,
Present.
Mr. Neal,
I'm expecting him momentarily.
Mr. Warsavage,
Present.
Ms. Murphy-Morrissey,
Present.
Ms. Williams,
Present.
Ms. Mitchell,
Present.
Mr. Fields,
Present.
Mr. Brown.
Present. Thank you. The district posted this evening's agenda to board docs at least 24 hours prior to the commencement of this meeting. Is there a motion to approve that previously posted agenda?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Are there any amendments to offer?
There are no amendments.
Thank you. The agenda has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please signify by saying aye opposed and state your name for the record. Those abstaining, please signify by saying I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carried. I will now turn over the Education and Pupil Services Committee agenda to co-chair Ms. Director Williams.
Mr. Marshallek, will you begin, please, with an overview of your agenda items for this evening and jump right into number one, please?
Great, thank you. So tonight we have two agenda items. First of which is informational only. It's the Elementary School Schedule Update. You'll see a very similar presentation that we did previously for the secondary schools. This time we'll be focusing on our elementary schools. Dr. Manfield will lead that presentation, who's here with me tonight. Again, informational only. Second agenda item is the 2023-24 school year district calendar. This will require board action. Dr. Kelly could not be here tonight, so I'm filling in for her. But I'll review the process and some of the highlights of this coming year's calendar for approval, again, for board action. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Manfrey, who will kick it off with our Elementary School Schedule Audit.
Thank you, Mr. Marshallak. Board President Brown, members of the board, and Upper Darby School District community, good evening.
Good evening.
The agenda item that is before the board and the public this evening is an audit from a scheduling expert, Mr. Elliot Marenblum. Mr. Marenblum has written several books and articles on best practices for school scheduling. Mr. Marenblum is a former school teacher, school counselor, assistant principal, director of middle school instruction, and an area director working out of the central office of Baltimore County Public Schools. Mr. Marenblum worked with us on an auditing of our high school schedule, and we also contracted with him to review the elementary school schedule. So why the need to audit our district high school and elementary school schedules? When the district received American Rescue Plan and Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Funds, ARP-ESSER, as a result of the significant lost learning opportunities of the pandemic, the district administration recognized that a review of our schedules related to flexible learning opportunities, the sleep study, staffing shortage, and competition with charter schools may better position us for future change. We also wanted to take this opportunity to see if we were missing any opportunities to develop more efficient school schedules that would maximize instructional time. To date, you have been presented with the results of the high school scheduling audit on August 23rd, 2022, and the audit of our grade 1 to 8 MTSS program on October 25th, 2022. This evening, I will be presenting the results of our elementary school scheduling audit. I will review with you the process that Mr. Marenblum took. I will demonstrate on a slide the consultant's credentials. I'll review the objectives of the audit, examine some of the challenges that were recognized by the auditor, some commendations, and then at the end, some recommendations made. Start with the process. During the summer of 2022, Dr. Christine Kelly and I developed a leadership team that included members of central administration, building level administrators, and members of our student services department. I'd like to take a moment now to thank them for their service to this project. They are Tim Lambert, Tom Fitty, Kristen Meehan, Mark Comfort, Chris Puglisi, Rob Schwartz, Kristen O'Neill, and Joanna DeMarco. In addition to this core group, we had many professionals as part of 4 subcommittees. These subcommittees included demographics, English learners, special education, and specials and reading. These subcommittees reported back to the leadership team. In total, we held 10 leadership meetings between September 2022 and December 2022, and during these meetings, we reviewed and analyzed the efficiency of the current schedule, including courses, class size, and the allocation of staff. Also during these meetings, reports were provided by our subcommittees. At biweekly elementary meetings, we reported to building principals and supervisors about our progress, and building principals presented periodic reports to their staff advisory teams provided by Mr. Marenblum. As you can see, as I spoke about Mr. Marenblum previously, he's an educator of over 35 years and is highly published in the area of scheduling. In fact, this is not Mr. Marenblum's first stop in Upper Darby School District. I worked with Mr. Marenblum in 2003 when the school district embarked, when I was an assistant principal for the 9th grade academy, the first 9th grade academy. Here were the objectives. To ensure that the elementary school schedules provide the best opportunity for efficient use of teachers, to examine equity across the school district, and to examine other scheduling possibilities and options. As Mr. Marenblum began his work with us, he quickly recognized some of the unique challenges facing the Upper Darby School District. During the process, Mr. Marenblum noted the following challenges. In his report, Mr. Marenblum points out, and it has been widely presented by the administration many times, that our schools are overcrowded, which can have a negative impact on developing a schedule. As a result, we have embarked on a new facility study and have been working hard to find a way to build a new elementary school in the eastern part of the school district where it is so desperately needed. As we will review in February with our updated facility study, all of the locations being reviewed present barriers to building a new school, yet we continue to try and find a way to make this happen. Also, you will later hear, later this evening, the country is experiencing a serious staffing crisis, a staffing crisis that is now beginning to affect Upper Darby School District elementary schools. Any scheduling options are affected by our ability to properly staff our schools. Any recommendations made here are subject to the current agreement that we have with the Upper Darby Education Association and need to be carefully reviewed from that lens. Finally, and probably most significantly, is no secret that Upper Darby School District has been underfunded for many years. I'd like to start with some very positive findings from Mr. Marenblum and the team. Mr. Marenblum commented that our team has been very creative in addressing the needs of our community despite the challenges, including being underfunded. Furthermore, he affirmed that this schedule is a proper vehicle for meeting the district goals of emphasizing social and emotional learning, emphasizing a strong elementary educational foundation in all subject areas with a focus on growth, and continuing to promote inclusive environments for the students and our community. The audit also confirmed an equitable distribution of available full-time equivalents, teachers, with consideration given to programs for our diverse population, and with the Aronimink construction project nearing completion, equitable distribution of FTEs is even becoming stronger. The schedules are rated by Mr. Marenblum as state-of-the-art and demonstrate a commitment to maintaining highly desirable class sizes. Furthermore, the report highlights a commitment to subject matter expertise by departmentalizing in grades 4 and 5. Mr. Marenblum comments on the school district's commitment to kindergarten by focusing the time we have on those students' developmental needs and a commitment to literacy as demonstrated by the amount of time allocated to English language arts and reading throughout the day. Finally, Mr. Marenblum provided high marks for the district's comprehensive special education program, and as you know, we are in the midst of updating the special education comprehensive program plan now. Some recommendations. Let me first remind the board and the public that Mr. Marenblum is keenly aware of the roadblocks that exist to making some of these recommendations a reality. Roadblocks such as the amount of time available in the school day. However, I will say that many of the recommendations are worded as, quote unquote, a continuation of what you are already doing. Mr. Marenblum expressed that a long-term goal of the district should be to revise the curriculum chart to increase the number of minutes dedicated to specials. This, however, is not without pitfalls, as currently we are providing the appropriate amount of time as prescribed by our curriculum in order to address standards and provide students with additional support in reading and math. Essentially, we would need to take minutes from our intervention periods or ELA, math, science, or social studies. In addition, we would have to recognize that we have two unique elementary school schedules based on the size of buildings. There is a small or medium and large school schedule that these schedules were created to fit the number of students, teachers, and courses for each school. Another recommendation is that we continue to monitor our English learners and special education programs throughout the year and make adjustments based on student needs. As one of our goals points out, we will continue to find ways to incorporate social and emotional learning in all curriculum areas. As a reminder, currently we dedicate 30 minutes every Wednesday to direct instruction through our social and emotional learning curriculum. We will continue to provide our teachers with professional development opportunities in the areas of trauma, restorative practices, and equity so that they may be weaved throughout the day in the general curriculum. As witnessed at the last board meeting, we are dedicated to our positive behavior intervention systems program, having many of our schools recognized by the state. We address language development standards by pulling ELs from additional math support. We do this because we are required to provide English learners with access to the core curriculum in math, science, social studies, and English language arts. We feel strongly that the additional reading support for English learners during that intervention time is essential. This is another demonstration that there simply is not enough time in the day to provide everything to everyone. If we could find a better time of day to address language development standards, we would. Mr. Marenblum recognizes this, but still included this as a goal for future consideration. Currently, our first and second grade students receive 90 minutes of English language arts instruction. Mr. Marenblum recommended adding an additional 15 minutes by reducing the time they spend on science and social studies from 60 minutes to 45. We could do this, but feel it does not effectively use our time, and the time would not be congruent in all of our schools. Some schools would be able to do first and second grade ELA for 105 straight minutes, while others would have to break that time up throughout the day because of the small and large school schedule differentiation. Recognizing that ELA standards are built into the science and social studies curriculum, we will approach this recommendation by continuing to professionally develop our teachers to incorporate the skills from English language arts into the science and social studies time. And in fact, across all curriculum, similar to what we are working on at our secondary staffs with reading apprenticeship. The number of reading specialists in each school is based on the number of students we're working towards being based on the number of students in the lowest 10th percentile. We try to ensure that the schools with the students who have the most need receive the support they need for their students to be successful. We will continue to do this. Finally, as all of you know, the school district is and will continue to explore construction opportunities in the eastern part of our community and hopefully alleviate some of the overcrowding spoken about earlier. And with that, I'm happy to try and field any questions that the board may have.
If money was no object, would we already have those things in place that he recommended? I mean, I know we have to be creative, and he complimented us on our creativity. So some of the things that he recommended, will we already have those things? And I'm sure there are no surprises, right? We've considered those things that he recommended. Is that correct?
I think that beyond money would certainly help, but it's also the amount of time that we have during the school day contractually with our collective bargaining agreement. There's only so many minutes in the day that we have dedicated towards instruction, rightfully so, and we're being asked really to fit a large amount of issues into a stagnant amount of time every day. And it continues to change, the mandates from the state and the requirements, the most recent being the need for social and emotional learning as a result of the pandemic and other things, continue to increase the demand, but not increase the amount of time that we have to deliver on those demands.
Wow.
Yeah, if I could just follow up to that, I think in particular at the elementary school level, obviously the biggest issue is appropriate resources and staffing certifications coming out at this point in time. So we will be coming up to the budget meeting and having a conversation about we're going to come out and ask for additional reading supports, let's say, and guidance support at the elementary school level. While we ask for those supports and try to rebuild to where we once were, the issue now, in comparison to 15 years ago, is everybody's looking for reading teachers. Everybody's looking for a guidance counselor. Everybody's looking for a social study or a social worker, and they simply don't exist at the volume that they did 15 years ago. Because 10, 15 years ago, when the state started to cut, the programs that were cut the most were the programs that were not Chapter 4 required, meaning the state didn't have standards set to require those, and they were seen as, my child doesn't need those, believe it or not. In this district, when we talked about social workers, they were the first areas that were recommended to be cut in public meetings, and that started to happen, and as a result, those programs started to suffer years ago because areas like reading specialists and social workers and guidance counselors were kind of seen as taboo 10, 15 years ago, and now those programs are reduced. So we do need reading teachers to decrease class size, but as Dr. Manfrey said, right now, in about a 385-minute school day, that's about what the elementary school day is. When you take 105 minutes for ELA and then another 30 minutes for reading intervention, and then another 30 minutes for math intervention, 60 minutes for math, 60 minutes for science and social studies, and students have to eat lunch, and they need some exposure to specials. There's only so much time in the school day. We really, if you really map out the best practices for time in school, elementary schools could go to 4:30 in the afternoon. And I just don't know of many elementary school teachers that are going to go from 8 o'clock until 4:30 without that additional compensation, to your point. So yes, money in one way would work, but to Dr. Manfrey's point, the school day is another barrier to that. And then when you put certain blocks of time in a schedule, it then defines how a music teacher is used, how an art teacher is used, and it limits their exposure when there's so many other instructional minutes.
Yeah, right. So there's the connection to money just goes back to the challenge of staffing. And I'm very, very sorry to report that my elementary school teachers course that I'm teaching this semester is down to 50 students when it previously was 80 to 100. So it's a problem that we're going to continue to face. Yeah, anyway. Back to the length of the school day, right? So absolutely, it would help if the school day could just be longer, and in fact, in many other countries, it is longer. But then, of course, it makes it harder to get teachers. And then we may think that having a long school day is not so good for elementary school students. We don't want them sitting around for that long. But then that leads into the question that I really want to ask, which is, over the summer, we had this whole wellness presentation where we said, yes, we want to support 60 minutes of activity for kids every day. And I understand that we definitely don't, we certainly do not have 60 minutes right now to give them. That's just clearly not there. But as I understand it, what our elementary school students are currently getting is about 15 minutes, which just seems, I mean, if I only got 15 minutes of activity in my day, I think I'd lose my mind. And so I know that this is not something we can flip a switch and fix, but are there any ways, what could we do to possibly get our kids a little bit more physical activity because they so desperately need it?
Yeah, not to be argumentative, I don't want to be argumentative, but I would say that there's a little bit more than 15 minutes per day of physical activity. It's probably not the kind of physical activity that you're looking for, but as an example, many of the morning meeting activities that take place during that half hour of the day has physical aspects to them. If the teachers, and I think most of them do the morning meeting routines correctly. There's transition time, right, in between classes where kids are walking, moving from one class to the other. Again, probably not the type of physical activity that you're referring to, Dr. Haig. But we up here at admin have been discussing some additional ways and some creative opportunities that we may have moving forward based on some difficult positions that are hard to fill and making some changes to maybe provide additional phys ed moving forward in the future. But those opportunities are going to come slowly over time. I don't know if, I don't want to go too far, so I'll let Dr. McGarry take my idea and explain it further. Actually, it was Dr. McGarry's idea. Go ahead.
So Ed taught first grade and fourth grade in elementary school, and he should, jump in based on this opinion, and we work together at Bywood. There's a couple complicated factors here in the school district. Not all of our schools have the luxury of the appropriate spaces. So at Bywood and Stonehurst, as an example, the gym is the cafeteria. So on one side, there are 130 or 140 students, and I would argue, different than Dr. Manfrey, it's even less in the larger schools that don't have cafeterias. Stonehurst and Bywood kids, typically, given the enrollment numbers, actually race through trying to eat and get some recess time. And that's definitely an area of concern where if we could lengthen that time, lunch and recess and physical education, I think all the folks who work at an elementary school level feel that that would be appropriate for kids to learn to play, and then those behaviors probably wouldn't carry on into the school, into the classroom. We agree there. That's where there's a disconnect with what those folks who set standards in academia say have to fit into an elementary school versus the practitioners who deal with young people every day and feel like playing and learning to play and socializing is as much of an important standard as 115 minutes of straight, I mean, think about that. I was an English teacher. 115 straight minutes of English class at any age might not be the most exciting concept. And so that's where a little bit of these things, as a first grade teacher trying to captivate students for 115 minutes, 105 minutes, it's a lot. So what the teachers do is they create opportunities for breaking that up and using the classroom creatively. But another barrier is the fact that the spaces are not there. So to Board President Brown's question, what we want to try to get to through this ed specs, again, as we looked at all the facilities, schools should have a cafeteria space and a gym space. Not all of our schools do have a cafeteria space and a gym space, and that makes using those spaces even more complicated because it's very noisy on the other side of what is pretty much a shower curtain. When lunch is happening and then the whistle's blowing and things are being running around, it's not the healthiest environment there. So that's a piece of it. But what we have to look at is, again, this is somewhat controversial. We are struggling to find specific positions at each level. As I'd mentioned before, years ago when cuts start to happen, other positions don't exist the same exact way. So a historical person that would come out with a library certification and teach library in schools, there are not as many of those folks around. It's now more of a technology certification or multimedia certification. So is there a way to, if we have an open position that's hard to fill, give those kids those other opportunities still and have appropriate use of the space? So that's what we're talking about. Okay, if we can't find this, can we find this? And creatively bring a good resource into the school that gets us to where we need to get to. But as a first and fourth grade teacher, you did it for many years. There were classroom activities that you did do to try to break up that time.
And there's no doubt when you're teaching first graders, you're finding ways to break up that time and do something that's fun, still hitting the standards, still keep them, into the curriculum, but also have them move around. I coached high school lacrosse when I was a teacher, so I had them do stretching drills, in between, reading leveled readers. Did calisthenics. So we did that as a way to warm up, in between our breaks. Right now, we still do brain breaks as part of our lakeside, training. And I think that's done across the board, K to 12, not just in our, early or younger kids. But as teachers in the elementary school, your kids need movement because otherwise you can't get it done. So we do build that into the day as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning brain breaks. I'll only add to the discussion that the larger elementary schools have a much more difficult time as well. The scheduling, when I mentioned essentially two different schedules, anything over 4 or 5 classrooms in a grade, like a Bywood might have 6 or 7 fourth grades. Well, those kids in those grades that have multiple classrooms can't go to the same exact special the same exact way. When I was an elementary school principal, I was lucky enough to be at Mr. Rogers' brother's school. I was the principal of Primus Elementary School. It worked out perfectly for me. So I had enough teachers and enough kids, small enough and large enough to justify it working out perfectly. It doesn't work out that way with larger schools. It becomes a more complex puzzle to put together.
No, I understand that, and I do appreciate all of the time and the concern and the care that you're all putting into it. So thank you for that. I did have just one more really quick question that's separate, just to clarify what is being said about the reading specialists. So that you said something about the lower 10%. I'm assuming we're talking about students, not the lower 10% at each school, but it's the students who are scoring at a certain level within the state averages or something like that. I guess if you could just clarify, because obviously if it was 10% at each school, then the teachers would just be distributed proportionally. And
So we're using Ames, the lowest 10 percentile according to our Ames Web data. And so I'll give you an example. If essentially what Murren Bloom is asking us to do is to treat reading specialists like district employees, not building employees, and to redeploy reading specialists where we feel the greatest need is based upon the lowest 10th percentile by Ames Web data. We do that with special education teachers currently. We do it with English as a secondary language teachers. We move teachers occasionally to different buildings because there's a greater need in one building than another.
So I'm assuming that when Mr. Marenblum came out, he did not take into account that we are doing cross-curricular education when he looked at that 105 minutes. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. He recognizes that in grades 1 and 2, we're doing 105 minutes of ELA, and that we departmentalize in grades 4 and 5. So you might have a teacher who teaches English, language arts, and social studies. You might have a teacher who teaches math. So I don't know if I'm capturing the answer to your question.
So you said he's recommending 105 minutes, and you said we can't really do that within the school day.
Right.
we
Currently,
can
I'm
do
sorry, I said 105, 90 minutes of ELA instruction, grades
But
1 and
he's
2.
recommending 105. But you
Correct.
said we can do that if we teach cross-curricular.
I understand what you're saying.
But he's not taking that into account.
Right,
We
no,
explained that to him
yeah,
that we are.
We did. We explained to him that we don't believe that by the very nature of our framework, that we would be able to pull that off because of the different schedules, the large school schedules and the smaller school schedules, but that we capture a lot of the ELA standards, to your point, in our social studies curriculum and science curriculum. For some reason, I guess he just wanted to keep that in his recommendations.
I think there's a key part to your question, and I want you to tell me what you think about this response. For some reason in education, there's a theory that reading can only take place in English and language arts. No matter what level you work in, whatever level, high school, middle school, and elementary school, that when a test came out in the state, and it was a reading test, the middle school teachers felt tremendous pressure that the reading test was the responsibility of an English teacher. So much so that the state, when they created PVAS, which is as you know, as a teacher, how they then would find out which of you are responsible for the growth or the lack of growth of that teacher, it created people who wanted to leave certain subject areas because I'm not going to be blamed for the third grade teacher who should be responsible for this student's reading score or growth. To your point, part of this is a core team communication piece where writing takes place across the curriculum, not in isolation. The skills learned in reading should be applied across all areas. This is, I think, a systemic issue in public schools still, where this idea, even at the high school level, that when you go to write a paper and you set that paper up, the paper expectations should be set up similarly in all subject areas when you go to write. It's taught here, and the expectation is it's applied here. Back in the day, MLA, when you go to college and you write your dissertation, APA format, but there's a format that's generally expected of everybody when they do it. Well, these same reading skills, how you attack a text, should be attacked in reading, math, science, and social studies. So when this was brought to me and Ed and Christine after those conversations, there were some healthy back and forths where it was like, I'm saying, why do you have to carve 15 minutes out of anything? You don't have to carve 15 minutes out of anywhere. You simply take the skills and concepts that we're learning and apply them across the board and reinforce those. And that's where it became kind of a relief that there is no need to carve out that concept. I think what Mr. Mayenblum was hearing from some on these committees, it has to happen here, and we have to take it from here. Also, I think there's a little bit of fear, and this is not a commentary other than on time for teachers. Setting up science kits and things for individuals sometimes, taking up and putting it down is somewhat of a barrier. And I think a lot of people, an elementary school teacher, when you think about it, they've got to be a jack of all trades. So being skilled in all those subject areas is a high level of responsibility, and they may feel more comfortable adding 15 minutes to the ELA class than the 15 minutes in the science or social studies class.
Right, and I also think Mr. Marenblum's position was that in first and second grade, you're learning to read, and as you get beyond first and second grade, you're reading to learn. But the idea that But the idea that, the idea that Dr. McGarry alluded to is correct. We have to make sure that all of our teachers are comfortable teaching the skill of reading, no matter what subject area they're teaching. And that's the realization that we came to at the end of the day. So I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
No, right.
first.
So to my point, adding more time to the school day is not necessarily the answer. The answer is coaching or training, teaching teachers to teach across the curriculum?
I would still like to add more time to the school day, but yes.
Well, yes, but the other recommendation that was made that we can't fit in, and as an elementary teacher, they would appreciate it because it would be more prep time, is to get more time in specials, because right now their specials times is shorter, which also then contributes to Dr. Haig's point of physical education. So at an elementary school level, I think I'm out of that part of it a little bit now, but I think it's they only get 45 days of phys ed at a max in a year, right? 30 minutes a day. So when they rotate through that, and it's only 30 minutes, to the other comment that was from the wellness discussion in June, the recommendation from the wellness committee is try to help contribute to the minimum of 60 minutes a day of some kind of physical activity, which then leads me to, which I wanted to allude to, I watched a little bit of the township meeting, and I know Mr. Hoyt from the community is big on this. We have to find another way. I know this board has talked about it through Mr. Desnoyers and Mr. Neal's work on the policy with 707, getting kids involved in something beyond the school day as far as youth organizations, whether it's music, art, but physical activities too, whether it's running, because that's why we have our running clubs, something outside of the school day that contributes to that 60 minutes, and we need to figure out how we can help make that accessible to our local youth programs and get them up and running, because that would be another opportunity for those days to be extended and have other people who do want to do that contribute to that.
I just sort of breezed over this one recommendation about explore ways to provide English learner instruction without impacting the math MTSS. So I know this is like a really hard thing, but I think we are trying to look for some like magic bullet to solve a myriad of problems, especially in the areas of reading and math. So I'm just wondering, it seems to me like we're talking about trim from here, we're trying to really make it work and provide the needs for everyone. And I know you said that we can't provide the needs for everyone, but I know we are looking to try to increase students' proficiency in reading and math. So I'm just wondering what you're thinking about that particular recommendation.
Yeah, look, this has been a discussion for a long time in the Upper Darby School District, and this is not, and I'm not going to name names of other school districts, but imagine being a first or second or a kindergarten teacher in the Upper Darby School District where the varying needs, to Desiree's point that she made, board member, that you commented on across the curriculum, when there are similar needs in a classroom, I hope we would agree, the concept of differentiated instruction, which I struggle with, which I think is like chasing a unicorn, when you have 7 different levels in a classroom as an elementary school teacher, and then when you add to that as a classroom teacher, you might have students who have specific learning disabilities in reading and math or English as a second language, and then gifted students in the same classroom. And you are supposed to move every single one of them in that English and language arts class. And there's one of you in one room. That is a very complicated, and I watched Ed do it as a first grade teacher with 28 kids in a class. That's a lot to ask of an elementary school teacher. I don't believe it's necessarily possible for one teacher to get to the needs of every single one of those kids every single day, all of the time. That's a lot in every single subject. The elementary school teachers teach the most in a day in comparison to any other level with the fewest amount of breaks at the elementary school teachers. So what the recommendation seems to be too, which is again another push and pull those kids into another area. But the problem is it's not really the best practice necessarily all the time. To the comment that was made earlier, the best practice is to try to include as much as possible, expose these students, and then maybe push in and provide those resources. To Board President Brown's point, if we can get the funding and there are people available, you can provide a classroom teacher with either an assistant or an EL teacher that's available to push in or a special ed teacher to push in. Right now, we don't have those. And so to your point, Ms. Mitchell, it's on an elementary school teacher to do all of this all day, every day, and almost every single day of the week right now, they're covering another class and they have no prep.
And not to add fuel to the fire that we have here already, to President Brown's point, is if money weren't an object, because when you look at some of the classroom spaces in some of our schools, teachers can't even do what you're saying, meet the needs of every student. They don't even have a space to have centers even. I mean, the desks take up the entire room. So if money wasn't an object, we would fix all that, right?
Right.
And when some of these things wouldn't be as much of an issue, the disparities amongst the schools are, these are systemic problems that we face. And we're working towards it. We're doing our best, and I appreciate all your efforts. I mean, it's great to have somebody come in, though. I just want to leave this on a positive note and say that our schedules are state of the art. That's amazing.
Well,
So,
I think more
kudos.
importantly, thank you for that. I think more importantly, he was very, very impressed with the commitment of the professionals that he encountered during the time that he was here. So we have just wonderful people here. But I do want to just say one thing about our English learners. I want to remind everybody that of all of the students that we have in Upper Darby School District, they are assessed the most. They have to take the access test. They are not exempt from PSSA reading, no matter what their level of English expertise is, and they have to take the math. And we are also required to provide them the opportunity to be in the general curriculum with their peers, and required to deliver language development standards to them. And so Dr. McGarry is right. Oftentimes our English learner teachers will push in when they can, and sometimes they'll pull kids out to get those standards delivered. But again, as I said in my narrative, it just highlights the fact that there's just not enough time to give everybody everything that they need. So thank you all very much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much. Can move on to agenda item number 2.
As I mentioned tonight, Dr. Kelly could not be here. You're going to see a very similar process that she has followed in the past with this district one-page calendar and the one-page summary. Again, this is for next school year, and again, this is for also for board action tonight, or at the February board meeting. But again, we'll go through with some of the highlights and some of the holidays, some of the weeks off for next school year, the testing calendar as well. Just a reminder, everything in this school calendar does adhere to the Pennsylvania School Code, Department of Education's Act 8 exemptions, in addition to District Policy 803 for school calendars. Every calendar draft was shared with each of the unions for their input. Again, as Dr. Kelly puts a lot of work into this process over the years and reviews it with every single person she possibly can, including our team, to get feedback, push back, and then revise it as appropriate. But again, as I mentioned before, it's very similar to other approved calendars we've used in the past. Both copies of the summary and also the one-page calendar are in board docs if you want to follow along with it, and for the public to review as well. Slide 2 does show the important district dates for next school year, including the start of the school year for our teachers coming back, which is before Labor Day once again, in addition to our students returning before Labor Day as well. You can see the professional development days, the full day professional development days are listed, and one of which is also in April, which is the primary election day, and also contract and service for our teachers, where they don't have to come into the building physically. We have to do professional development on their own and prove that they've done that requirement. Graduation is going to be, again, anticipated on June 11th of the 2023-24 school year, and June 12th will be the last day for our teachers. In the event that we do anticipate that the year must be delayed for any type of construction project, which at this time we are not, we will come back with another version of this calendar if appropriate and if necessary in June of 2023. The important slide, on this slide, the important piece of this slide are to highlight when the daily schedule will be adjusted, for our families. So again, you have the early dismissals, which again are on a monthly basis for all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. With the exception of January, other than the high school, they will have an early dismissal on that day. And of course, in April for the state testing. As you can see, the fall conferences are listed up there as well. Winter break, again, is very similar to this school year. We don't have an extra day off like we did this past school year. We do return to school on January 2nd after observing the holiday on January 1st for the New Year's Day. Spring break is much earlier this next school year, beginning on March, as it was in April. So, and school resumes on April Fool's Day. So we'll see how that goes next school year. All right, and again, state assessment. I know we all love talking about state assessments, but here is the predicted calendar for next school year. And I haven't even gotten through this year yet, but they want us to make note for next school year. So again, these are all testing days for our students and our tested grades 3 through 12. Again, Keystones, PSSAs, there's 2 waves of Keystones you can see, one in the winter and one in the spring. And Dr. Manfred's whispering, we don't know when access testing will be yet, but once we have that information, we'll make sure it's added and communicated to our proper people. And of course, lastly here, we did want to add some additional language to the calendar to allow some flexibility with the administration and the board to make adjustments as needed. Noting our flexible instruction plan, which we did have to use this past week at Aronimink Elementary School. But again, gives our team more autonomy to make a decision with the board in terms of have an emergency or have to make an adjustment without going to board approval. But at this time, that's all I have for the presentation. I hope Dr. Kelly's proud of stepping in for her tonight, did as best I could. But I'll have to take any questions from the board if you have any.
So in the for the example of Aronimink, we just had to take a flexible instruction day due to the issue that was in the building. When that is done at an individual school, as far as the state is concerned, do they count that against all the schools? Or is it only, are they counting the flexible instruction days per school, not by the district?
Yes, but there's a couple things working right now. We are still operating under an emergency time template currently, so we still have more flexibility than even the FID flexibility. FID, the flexible instructional days for those who are here with us or at home and then not in the educational world. A few years ago, the Commonwealth recognized that technology can be leveraged to our advantage. And when there should be a situation of a power outage or a severe storm or some kind of a local natural disaster, how can we still try to deliver instruction and allow those days to count? Unfortunately, the Commonwealth only allows for 5 emergency-related school use days that have to fit within the FID plan. So once we come out of the pandemic and the Commonwealth does away with this emergency time template that we've passed each year, you'll only be allowed to use some type of emergency weather-related move to either work packets or virtual instruction. We do virtual instruction up to 5 days a year for those schools. So under Act 80, school days are 900 and 990, depending on the level, and then there's 180 days that you have to meet each year. That goes for kindergarten. Kindergarten AM and PM are counted as separate pieces. Vocational students have separate hours and separate timetables that we report out. So let's say that one of our schools, we did not deliver instructional days to one school in specific or one grade level, like 12th graders. They would have to make up that time. So it is basically down to even sometimes specific grades, how this works out that we report this information.
My concern with the calendar is the number of days per quarter or per semester. I had requested this information last week from Dr. Kelly. So semester 1 has 92 days, semester 2 has 90 days, and so when we do some testing, it takes away that time, and typically our teachers in the second semester have less instructional time to teach, and they're typically going through material faster at a faster rate than the first semester. So I was hoping to get some equity in how we manage the quarters and the semesters, depending on any state assessments, local assessments that we're doing.
And Dr. Kelly did share that, your question and her answer, with me before tonight's presentation. So, I'm looking at the numbers of the days, and although it is off by a couple of days, they're pretty similar in the sense of, be 92 days for semester 1, 90 for semester 2. But I understand your concern about state testing taking away from the instruction. Unfortunately, we, don't have much of a choice to say we won't test, at least not yet. So we have to make do with that. I know as a former principal and teacher at the elementary level, we did find ways to make sure that the content that was prioritized was taught during that day, during that time. If you were a special education student, you had your special education time served during that day. So we had we had to make some priority choices about how to get the content in. So, I don't want you to think that we're rushing through content. I think there was more of a prioritization on what we had to teach during that time, during state testing time.
Yeah, because like in September, when students are returning, we typically develop a lot of lessons to aid our students in that transition back to the school year. So we lose a little time there. Second semester, it's that transition again, the state testing. So I would just like to see a little bit more consideration with that. So for example, in like 47 days in quarter one, really if you take that first week, that chunk, where we typically have a lot of assemblies, people are being pulled for that, and then quarter two, 45 days. So really, if you were to look at instructional time, I think there would be a larger difference instead of just looking at days. So I would like the team just to kind of look at that in the future, to try to adjust as much as possible, or at least have that in the back of their mind when looking at the calendar.
That's fair. That's what I'm going to give you, something to kind of consider as you're bringing that point up too. And I'll argue this, till the day I die. But I would argue the time you put in September and October pays off exponentially in the remainder of the semester. I can speak to from personal experience that I think if I didn't do that in the beginning of my school year when I was a teacher, there's no way I would have gotten through the content that I got through and moved every one of those little kids that Dr. McGarry was talking about to being proficient readers at the end of that school year. So I think there is a lot of value in that kind of soft skill type instruction, if you will. And it does pay off dividends in the end if it's done correctly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm just saying, if we are doing those soft skills in the beginning, like you're saying, that we should add additional time to that quarter, because we know that we're doing those soft skills, not content-based instruction.
Understood.
To David's point, though, when we look at the curriculum mapping, we take that into account, right? What needs to be taught prior to testing and things like that, right, Dr. Marshall?
Yeah, I mean, there is a scope and sequence for all of our curriculums as well. So there is, we have that well established for a long period of time.
So the standards that need to be taught are accounted for prior to testing. Doesn't really matter the days in the quarter then.
So that's true too. And also, if you remember, the state did push back state testing a number of years ago to reflect allowing more time for schools to adjust to the school year and be more prepared for the state assessments. But yes, we do have, as you mentioned, a very well-defined curriculum map that addresses all the standards prior to this assessment.
And didn't we take the time to even backwards map it? I remember a talk about that several years ago where we really looked at where, maybe Dr. McGarry can talk to this, where the student needed to be at a certain point, and we made sure that was all lining up. I mean, obviously, we still experience challenges because we are such a transient community, but I think we looked at it as far as students who begin as Upper Darby students and end as Upper Darby students. Dr. McGarry, maybe you.
Yeah, and perhaps we could do a whole night on all this, just so everybody understands the complexity of Upper Darby School District. And again, I would argue far more complex and unfair in comparison to other school districts. At the kindergarten center, if you go to the kindergarten center, and this board is aware of this, there are students registering still into October. So that means that those teachers have students coming in that were not here in August, were not here in September, and they have to get to them to a certain place. We have students literally coming and leaving the country at certain points of the year for a month or 2 months that we are in and out of these classrooms with these teachers, and they still have to take the test. If they show up during the window of the testing, a week before the testing, they're obligated to take these assessments here in the school district. Yes, Ms. Mitchell, you're correct that we used to, many moons ago, which was referred to as teaching to the test, have a very specific back mapping, forward mapping, scope and sequence. What we've come to understand too in Upper Darby is the certificate for a teacher says the art and science of teaching. And we got away from the concept of the art and science. That's what it says on your certificate when you become a teacher in the Commonwealth. When we have teachers that we're asking to do so much here, we say trauma, social and emotional, be a reading expert, be a math expert, 60 minutes of physical education, which is important. An elementary school teacher's head is like, this is overload for me. Oh, and I have no prep. and I've got to do these things. I got to teach how to use a scissor, how to open a door for somebody. Sometimes bathroom skills are being taught in the schools here in the school district. I don't think anybody understands because I was a secondary person, until I went to see him teach first grade and then did it myself, which I wasn't very good at. First grade teachers are special people. Kindergarten teachers are special people. Third grade teachers are special. So we have to allow an Ed Marshallak as a first grade teacher to say to me, the principal of the school, here's your scope and sequence. You could take that with you and go back down to your office. You got to trust me to get my kids to where I'm going to get them to. And it may take us 4 or 5 times to learn how to transition to the bathroom. And so we learned to allow that autonomy and that art and science of teaching. Yes, those things are in place. 45 days, 47 days, my theory is this. Taking a test is still instruction, not that I'm in favor of the tests. We have to empower and trust the people that we've given the responsibility to work with our children, train them, and trust them. It's what's in a rose. The number of days in a semester, although I appreciate it, there is always a skill being taught by that teacher. The problem is we have to have certain things aligned because the computer systems we're using to push out a report card or push out really dictate some of those. There is always flexibility. When I used to run the instruction and curriculum union meetings with Dr. Kelly that now others are running, sometimes we push it back a week. We might come back and say, we're going to move a marking period back 3 or 4 days because it was a bad winter. There's always that flexibility. What I don't want to get hung up on is the dictating the time that way and go back to a period of time where our teachers are handicapped by us in not meeting their kids where they are. Because that was a very bad period, and I think it's led to a lot of teachers leaving the profession too.
Totally. I remember specifically with Storytown, there was a script, and there was principals that would go into the classrooms, and they would time the teacher on how they did the script. It was a terrible time in our district. My kids were very young at the time. Teachers were crying. Yeah, they were required supposedly to do that. It was a really awful time. And that is no longer the case, thank God. But we do still have standards, and we know what's going to happen as far as what curriculum is taught sort of generally when.
Actually, I don't think I'm being understood. So if a course is all year, the marking periods don't really matter. Okay? Wood shop. Let's say it's a trimester. Okay, if it happens during a certain period of the year, there would be less time in that trimester than other trimesters. Okay, so that student would have less time on a project. They wouldn't get to a project, let's say. That's my concern. So the marking periods for those specials that we're trying to increase, and I think are so important in a child's education, because we see that those are the fields that are actually hiring, that need employees, that I want to make sure we're focused on and that we're not taking away. So for example, language arts, which is a year-long program in elementary and middle school, the marking periods isn't going to impact that because they're going to continue. What it's going to impact are the special areas. And so when I talk about marking periods, including quarters, semesters, trimesters, that's what I'm talking about, the courses that are scheduled within those confines, that we're not specifically looking at teaching to the test, but we're looking at certain skills, and even though they are getting those skills, it may benefit them to actually have it one semester over another semester. That's where I'm trying to go with that.
Yeah, look, Board Member Neal, the reality is when you do a schedule, whether there's weather-related or early outs or whatever you have, there are sacrifices throughout that day. Some school districts will take a snow day and reset the A, B, C, D, E, F to always do that. The problem then is you have to make up certain days. In our teacher's contract, the first 2 snow days are not made up in our teacher's contract. So inevitably, in unified arts classes or specials classes, and also I would argue in core classes, depending on the standards that are recovered that day, you have to play catch up. There's no question about that. Unless you're going to extend the school year, however, I would argue, catching up those days to make it work out is difficult. We used to run overlapping periods of time, and I had this conversation with the middle school schedule that I'd like to add as a plug to this conversation. We may be coming back to talk about half days here or there for teacher prep, but teachers historically when we were running a different middle school schedule on a wheel, they were 30-day courses, and they inevitably overlapped. The problem then becomes when you go to an automated report card, you can't go back in time to publish that. So when we're giving, there's a lot of complicated factors that go into extending days and extending report periods. When we were doing report cards by hand, not a problem. But now when you're pushing it out into a system and they're going out in a report card, pushing a day here when the other semester begins and a new elective is supposed to begin, and you're scheduling that and the kids have to get to a certain place, it's a lot complicated. We do at times push back semesters to make that happen and make those adjustments. Here, this is based on feedback and a review with the teachers union and teachers through the instruction and curriculum report so that we're working together to make sure we're building a calendar that's not just administratively driven, but also driven by the teachers who feel covering their content. Not that it's lost on us that there will be times, to your point, that days in certain marking periods, as you said, for certain students at different levels in certain electives may miss some time. That's true. That's difficult to make up.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure that that's present in our minds as we go through the process.
Just one quick thing. You had said that we have a professional development day. I think you said April, and that it was tied to, or at least was the same day as the primary, but we don't necessarily know when the primary is going to be in 2024. I guess my question really is just, I see there's an April 23rd and a May 24th PD day, and I'm just wondering, is the plan, because there is talk in particular of like Pennsylvania moving forward on the primary schedule, and it's a presidential primary, so we know it's going to be busy, and our schools are polling places, and so, and my question is the plan to move a PD day, if the primary lands on a day that's not one of these days, to move one of those days to that day? Is that a plan? Yeah?
We've done it before. I think we'll
Yeah.
consider it again as well.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Great, thank you. Any further comments from the board? If not, we can wrap up comments from the board and move to our public comments. Are there any public comments this evening?
We do not have any public comments this evening.
Okay.
Do we have any?
We can move on to a review of the agenda for this evening.
Okay, the first item, Dr. Manfred gave a review of our elementary scheduling audit. Again, information only, no need for board action. Number 2 is the proposed 2023-2024 District 1-page calendar, and this does require board action.
The board action for the agenda item is just for us to vote at a later meeting in February. Are we all in agreement to do that?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'll turn this back over to President Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, for running that meeting. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Education and Pupil Services Committee meeting. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.